Chapter 12. Egan dropped Nathan at the parsonage at 9 that night. Nate was pale and tired, but happy, as he told us all about the A&R guy he'd met. I played him some of my songs, and he was real enthusiastic. "Have you eaten?" I asked. Nathan glanced at me in annoyance. "And he's coming out to Riverhouse next Saturday to listen." He didn't mention that Paige and I were no longer expected to play with him. That was something I was forced to explain later on, along with trying to defend Nathan's behavior that week. Nothing mattered now except his music. At first he made a stab at carrying out his responsibilities at the church with me, but he didn't talk and answered anything I said in absent monosyllables. Then he would be off to the river with his guitar or to Egan's studio. By Wednesday he'd blown off the church work and just disappeared with his guitar. As painful as anything to me were the increasingly worried looks on his parents' faces when he didn't show up for meals. Once Artis carried him a picnic lunch down to the river and came back in tears. "He wouldn't talk, like he didn't even know who I was. He just looked at me and kept on playing his guitar." "Tim," Mrs. Whitley said, "you go talk to him." "Nothing I can say," I told her. "He's all wrapped up in this thing with Egan, and he's just got to get it out of his system." I tried to make it sound so temporary. I tried so hard to believe that it was. Brother Whitley was especially upset because Nathan had left me to do all the church work. I considered making a big fuss about that, thinking maybe guilt would jolt Nate out of his obsession and back to reality. But they were so distressed at this point that all I wanted to do was cover for him. Besides, I didn't mind the extra work. Over at the church was the best place I knew, and in spite of the rattlesnake and the spade, it still felt like the safest. I found myself saying prayers while I dusted and vacuumed, simple prayers like mantras. Take care of him. Don't let Egan hurt him. Please let it be okay. I guessed that all of Egan's energy now was focused on getting Nate ready for the gig this Saturday in front of the mythical A&R guy. Nathan stayed late at Riverhouse every night that week. When he did come home, he'd evade his parents with a word or two and go straight upstairs. I would follow with some sort of healthy snack, hoping he might eat a bite or two. He'd be stretched flat on the bed with the TV on, the sound non-existent. I'd sit down as if we were just hanging out and munch on whatever I'd brought up, milk, chips or cookies, fruit. "Drink your milk, Nate," I'd say over my shoulder, and he'd drink some to shut me up and maybe eat a little. But he was losing weight anyway. I could see it, the planes of his face changing and thinning. Finally I would fall asleep and wake up later to find him gone. I would listen in the hall, and sure enough, he'd be working tunes in the attic. One thing was different, though. He didn't take the lamp in with him. I could tell by the crack beneath the closed attic door that he was sitting behind it in total darkness. He never came home completely exhausted, and he never seemed to be high on anything the way he'd been that Saturday night. But looking back, I think he was trying to stay on one last steady drive, rationing his energy for whatever demands Egan made on him. I couldn't even get him to talk to me beyond a yes or no or A few times, when he'd ghost past me with his guitar, I'd say, "Hey, Nate, let's drive out and see Paige," or "Let's go get high." And he would concentrate on my face for about a second and say, "Not right now," still with a modicum of nice preacher's boy politeness, and drift down to the riverbank or out to the station wagon. Once I tried to brazen my way along with him to Riverhouse. "Let me come along and listen, just for moral support. How about it?" But he only said, "No," mildly enough, and went on out the door. I'm sure he figured I was jealous, still trying to get in on the act. No telling what Egan was saying to him about me. And what was I supposed to do about Egan, and put a counterspell on him or something? Hell, I was afraid of him. I knew I couldn't do anything, or if I could, I sure didn't know what it was. Turns out that the prayers I was saying over at the church were the best thing I could have done, because they were answered. Yes, they were, just not in a way I would have chosen or ever dreamed of. What made that week doubly weird was the Midsummer Revival held Monday through Friday at the church. This made my work a lot harder, since I had to clean the sanctuary again every day. Brother Whitley, his brow furrowed with anxiety for Nathan, said he'd pay me double, but I didn't care. Having more to do helped me not to worry. The revival would have been kind of a trip, actually, if Nathan had been there laughing about it with me. I went Monday night to get my mind off Egan. For the hymn singing, they dragged out these tattered brown hymnals called Cokesbury hymnals, and I happened to sit next to this tall, old, white-haired guy who had evidently come just for the singing. "Hallelujah, thine the glory," he roared. "Hallelujah, amen." The church was packed with people I'd never seen on Sunday mornings. The guest preacher was a beefy guy, a reformed alcoholic, who rang the changes on that theme for about an hour. I sat letting my eyes follow the cracks in the plaster walls, enjoying the nighttime atmosphere of the church, and for a while I forgot about Nathan, alone with Egan like a nice dog caught in a lion's den. He didn't come to the revival Monday through Thursday, and I don't think his parents expected him to. But earlier in the summer he'd promised his dad he would sing at the last service Friday night. Brother Whitley mentioned that several times during the week, with a sort of ominous hope, as Nathan came and went like somebody in a dream. I didn't go either Tuesday or Wednesday. Those nights, Artis was allowed to stay home with me and make popcorn and watch TV, and we kept our minds off Nathan that way. Thursday night, short on sleep and way out on edge, I decided to go again. But the atmosphere wasn't the same. The hymns seemed sadder, even a little fearful. "Work, for the night is coming." And the preacher was on a rampage. He yelled about sinfulness and the influence of Satan until I was ready to walk out. I'd hoped to get away from thoughts like that, but this guy was offering no comfort at all. That night Nathan did not come home until after 1 o'clock, and fell into bed without a word or a glance. My dreams, when I slept, were horrible. Snakes in my bed, and Egan tapping on the window for me to let him in, tapping nicely, with a nice smile, because he was eventually going to get in whether I let him or not. I was never in my life so glad to hear the little morning bird start singing. Then that day, Friday, all the tension came to a head. At about 10 that morning, Paige knocked at the back door. I hadn't talked to Paige all week, and as far as I knew, neither had Nathan. He was in the kitchen, having trailed wearily downstairs a few minutes after I had, and we were silently drinking coffee. I'd been debating whether to push him to eat something. It was kind of hard to get myself up to do that, when I didn't want anything either. Anyway, when we heard the knock, Nathan just kept staring into his coffee mug, so I got up to let Paige in. "Hey, Tim," she said, a determined edge to her voice. "Is Nathan here?" "Yeah, come on in the kitchen." I heard her tiny gasp when she saw how thin and haggard Nathan looked. He met her eyes for a second as if to check and see, "Yep, that's Paige," and then looked back down. "Hey," he said. "Hi," Paige said. Then she looked at me, and I took the hint. "I'm going on over to the church," I said. "See you guys later." The church was unlocked since Brother Whitley was there. I had the upstairs cleaning to do, besides getting the downstairs ready for the revival meeting, so I went up first. Opening the blinds in one classroom, I saw Nathan and Paige walking together down through the field toward the river. Good, I thought. Maybe some loving would orient him back toward the real world. I wasn't jealous this time, I swear. I was glad for him to be involved in anything away from Egan. But 15 minutes later, when I was working in the red, white, and blue high school room, I heard their voices outside. I had opened the windows because it was hot up there, and at first I couldn't believe it was Nathan I heard yelling. Nathan never yelled. But when I heard Paige's unmistakable tones answering him, also at the top of her lungs, I looked out the windows. They were coming back up through the field, Paige stomping along furiously, and Nathan right behind her. "Isn't it? Isn't it?" he was shouting. "There is nothing wrong with that," Paige stormed at him. "If that's all you care about, there is." "It's not all I care about." "Bullshit," Nathan told her, and that alone made me feel as if he were someone else entirely, because Nate rarely cussed. "You only went out with me at all because of what I looked like. You don't care about my music or what I want." "Yes, I do." You just want somebody who looks good to go out with and be up on stage with. Oh, we look so good together with your dark hair and my red hair. You said that one time. I was only... And somebody to have sex with. I met all your qualifications there, didn't I, when you were picking somebody for that? I started to feel as if I'd fallen into a Superman comic book, and this was the bizarro version of Nathan. His face was like I'd never seen it, stormy and wide-eyed, even angrier than the time he'd gotten mad at me because of the bullshit Egan had fed him about his voice. My hands, he said. Oh, my big, beautiful artist's hands. Well, it wasn't my big hands you wanted, was it? Geez, Nate, I thought. You didn't come over here today because you cared about me, because you cared about the things inside my head or what I'm feeling. You just wanted to get laid. Paige burst into tears and headed for her car. Nathan turned his back and ran his hands through his hair over and over as she roared away. I stood in shock, not believing what I'd heard. Then Brother Whitley came storming into view across the parking lot toward Nathan. Evidently, his office window had been open too. "You get inside right this minute," he shouted, and I remembered that, yes indeed, he was an ex-Marine. "Don't you dare use language like that anywhere near this church or this home." Nathan swung to face him. "This is my business." "Not when it's carried out in the parking lot of this church, it's not. And if I ever hear you talk that way to a girl again, you'll answer to me." Nathan didn't respond, not that Brother Whitley gave him time. "You get in that church and help Tim with the job you're supposed to be doing, or by golly, you'll be out of this house by nightfall." I believed him, and apparently Nathan did too, because after staring stonily at his dad for a few seconds, he started toward the church door. Brother Whitley shook his head and went toward the parsonage, evidently too upset to work any more. The next minute I heard Nate calling me downstairs, with a desperate edge to his voice. "Tim! Tim!" "Up here," I yelled back, going to the door of the senior high room. He sort of fled toward me down the hall, as if he were running away from something, but then he just went past me into the classroom and sank down onto the squashy old sofa. "I heard everything," I said shamelessly. He only shut his eyes, his head thrown back against the couch. "Nate, what the heck got into you to talk to her like that?" "I don't know," he said, barely audible. "Why were you saying those things to her? You don't really believe all that, do you?" I don't know. "Nathan, Paige loves you." And he started to cry, his face contorting, and leaned forward to put his head in his hands. "I know it," he said, choking. I sat down beside him. "Come on," I said helplessly. "I don't know what's happening." His voice was still breaking. "What am I going to do?" I took a deep breath and improvised, mainly trying to calm him down with commonplaces, like you would a little kid. "Well, you can help me finish cleaning, and tonight you can sing at the revival like you promised, and tomorrow you can talk to Paige, tell her you're sorry." "I can't." "What, talk to Paige?" Nathan sat up and wiped his face. He looked like hell, I thought, pale and drawn and old-looking against the shiny red, white, and blue paint on the wall behind him. "I can't sing in church tonight. I have to be at Egan's at 2, and we were going to work all evening." All my anger and frustration roared up inside me, and I told him, "You're singing in church tonight if I have to drag you." "I can't, I told you." "Tell Egan you have to leave at 6:30 then." "Tim, this is important." "Nathan," I thought, "you have no idea." "I'll come and get you," I said. "I'll drop you at Egan's at 2 and come pick you up for church. Then if you're really determined, you can go back afterward." He hesitated. "Come on, Nate. Your dad is already pissed off. If you blow off what you promised, it'll just make things tougher for you later on." Nathan sighed and leaned his head back. After a minute, he said, "I am just so fucking tired." "Sit here and rest, then. I'll finish up the cleaning." "You don't care?" "Nah, I've got it down to a science. Then we'll get lunch and I'll drive you to Egan's, okay?" Nathan kept his head thrown back, watching me. "Will you stick up for me with Paige tomorrow?" I wasn't sure how I'd gotten in on that, but I said, "You bet." "Okay," he said, and shut his eyes. And he really did sleep, while I cleaned and prayed that I'd be able to get him away from Egan tonight and back to the revival. That seemed like the most important thing in the world, like some contest between good and evil. And Egan wouldn't make it easy. I understood all too well how Nate could have said those things to Paige, remembering the evil impulse I'd felt in the park last Monday. Egan was responsible for their fight, with my help, of course. Because I was the one who had fostered Nathan's insecurity about Paige's feelings for him, by telling him Paige had said he was so beautiful the night she first saw him. And Egan had built on that insecurity, just as a few days ago he'd built my jealousy and desire into something truly evil in my head. Slowly I was realizing that he couldn't do it out of nothing. He had to have something to start with. When Nathan woke up, he and I went to the Dairy Jim drive-in for lunch. This way he was captive in the car, and I could make sure he ate. I sat solidly behind the wheel of the station wagon and told him I'd gladly drive him to Egan's as soon as he finished eating. So he downed a burger and a milkshake. We didn't talk, though. He'd retreated back into his own little world, staring out the window while he ate. As long as he was chewing or sipping, I didn't care. The parking lot of River House was deserted except for Egan's Triumph. "Hey," I said, as it looked like Nathan was going to get out of the car without another word. "I'll be back around 6. 6:30, he said over his shoulder. "Somewhere around there." I watched him go up the front steps, trying not to notice how thin and bent his back looked. I spent all afternoon at the church, finishing my cleaning. It was an excuse to be somewhere peaceful, with Brother Whitley at the house looking like a thundercloud. At last I saw him drive away, probably to make hospital calls, so I went back to the parsonage and showered and changed. Mrs. Whitley was frying pork chops for supper and worrying about where Nathan was. She was glad to hear he was still going to sing at church, but Artis didn't like it too well. "I hope you're getting him home in time to clean him up," she said darkly. "I think he slept in those clothes he's got on today." Mrs. Whitley looked at me, alarmed. "Tell me he didn't." I thought he probably had. "I'll make sure he's presentable." "He looks like some old tramp," Artis snapped, "or a hood. He didn't even shave today, and all my friends are coming tonight." "Tell him it's the rugged look," I told her. "Yeah, Nathan's about as rugged as it's the John the Baptist look." She finally laughed and said, "Hey, did you see Godspell?" and started telling me about that, her mind successfully off Nathan. We finished supper, just the three of us, and I went upstairs and got Nathan's sport coat and a brush in case I couldn't get him back home in time for a shower. Something told me it was going to take a while to pry him out of River House if Egan had anything to say about it. I hadn't really expected Nathan to be waiting for me on the porch, and he wasn't, so I steeled myself and went on into the bar. I hadn't been there for over a week. It was different. The pool players stopped playing and gave me the once-over. I didn't see any of the regulars we'd come to depend on when we played. This was a rougher, grimmer crowd, and the room seemed darker. When I walked past the bar, Van looked right through me. As I crossed the back hall and started up the steps, Egan's voice filtered down, sharp and angry. I couldn't hear what he said, but something about the cadence of it reminded me of those films of Hitler making a speech, slicing with his hands, putting that relentless, spiky emphasis on the words over and over. "Hello," I called, just to shut him up. The voice stopped, but nobody answered me. I had envisioned Nathan bowed over his guitar and Egan standing over him yelling. But when I emerged into the studio, Nathan stood at one of the windows, his back to me, staring out into the greenish, late afternoon light. Egan stood behind the board. I don't know if they'd actually been working or if he was just trying to look busy. His frozen green eyes were the lightest thing in the room. "We're right in the middle of something, Tim," he said briskly. I tried to meet his gaze as calmly as I could. God protect me, I thought. "Ready to go, Nate?" Nathan turned around with a stunned look on his face, probably left over from Egan yelling at him. "Revival starts in less than an hour," I told him, "and you look like hell." Nathan blinked and ran his hand through his hair. "And you can't walk into a church," I said pointedly, "looking like hell. Can he, Egan?" Egan was giving me this furious look, as if he'd love to have a piece of me. "So we need to get going," I went on in this flip kind of voice. "Get you in shape to praise the Lord, brother." Except I was dead serious, and Egan knew it, and all of a sudden I knew it kept him from getting at me. Now if I could just get Nathan out of there. I was packing up Nathan's guitar when Egan said, "How important is this demo to you, Nate?" Nathan struggled to say whatever Egan wanted him to say. "Damn it, Nathan," I thought, "you're like a bug with a pin stuck through it." But he was so far gone with Egan, so far out on that limb, that he was desperate to please him, didn't dare not please him now. Before he could get a word out, I said, "A few hours away tonight will have no effect whatsoever on your fucking demo." "Stay out of this," Egan told me, and his voice was like the hissing of the rattlesnake. I hoisted the guitar case and grabbed Nathan's arm. He followed me docilely until we got to the head of the stairs, and Egan said, "Nathan, he's jealous because he's not in on the act anymore. He's trying to drag you away from what you're supposed to be doing." "That's not true, that's not true," I had been saying all through that little speech, but Nathan had halted uncertainly. Up into his ear I said, "You promised your dad you would do this, and you promised God you would do it." I didn't know if he had, but it sounded good. "And you've got to come do it now. You can come back here afterward." He still didn't move, looking trustfully at Egan, and my control snapped. "In the name of Christ, Nathan, come on!" And the name of Christ did it, I guess, because Egan flinched and Nathan moved again. I halfway pushed him down the stairs ahead of me. "Go, go," I kept saying, bumping him with the guitar case, through the hall and past the staring, unfamiliar faces. "Keep going." By the time we got to the car, he'd waked up enough to turn and yank the guitar case out of my hand. "Cut it out," he said. "I don't need you pushing me." Glad to hear it. I checked my watch. Only 6:30. We got back to the parsonage in record time, but the family had already gone over to the church. Nathan ran upstairs, showered and shaved, and changed to a fresh shirt. I looked him over. He'd put the same rumpled jeans back on, but they looked okay. I handed him a brush, and he did his best with it, then handed it back to me automatically, as if it were my business to take care of it. When I just glared at him, he said, "Oh, sorry," and grinned at me, as if all that tension back at Egan's hadn't happened. And now I think he really didn't remember it. The longer he was away from Egan, the more normal he got. "Hey, what are you singing tonight, anyway?" I asked him, as we started across the parking lot to the front of the church. Amazing Grace, to the tune of House of the Rising Sun." "Really?" I considered this. "You can do that?" "Yeah, it fits perfectly." I never would have thought of that. We were in the crowded narthex now, and he gave me another sideways flash of what was almost his old humor. "Obviously you never went to church camp." "Never did." We made our way down the side aisle to the front pew. "Did I miss much?" Nathan laid his guitar case on the pew and snapped open the catches. A wistful expression flickered across his face. It was okay. I saw Artis's relieved grin 3 pews back. Evidently Nathan had spruced up enough for her approval, as well as that of several of her friends. Mrs. Whitley, a little farther back, smiled at us too. As we sat down, Brother Whitley and the guest preacher came in and sat in the 2 large chairs flanking the pulpit, the way they'd done every night. Tonight's service was about like the others, except for extra hymn singing. Nathan and I sort of droned along with them. He wasn't pushing, probably because he'd been singing all afternoon, and I wondered if he'd been having trouble with his voice, and if that was what Egan had been giving him hell about when I got there. But I shoved that out of my mind. I didn't want to think about Egan. During the offertory, I amused myself by opening the hymnal to Amazing Grace and fitting the words to House of the Rising Sun. A little bizarre, I decided, but cool. Nathan looked calm when he got up to sing. Standing casually in front of the altar rail, only a few feet from me, he adjusted the strap on his shoulder, tuned a bit, and started strumming. He sounded fine on the first verse, his voice quiet, but full of those underlying warm tones. As he started the second verse, I felt myself beginning to relax. "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear," he sang. Then, on the high note, "and grace," his voice quit. It didn't break, it just closed up, the way it had stopped at River House weeks ago. He shook his head and kept playing the verse. He made a couple more attempts to sing, but could only shake his head again. Brother Whitley frowned, and the other minister looked confused. I felt a stir of uncertainty in the congregation behind me. Then I was on my feet, the Cokesbury hymnal in my hand, still, thankfully, opened to Amazing Grace. I got to Nathan's side in one step and said, low, "Keep playing." His face was frozen, but his strong, well-trained hands kept going automatically without missing a beat. I started the second verse over, and for a few bars I heard my own voice ringing out, "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear." The sound I heard started as a low growl. At first I thought it was a truck revving up at the stoplight outside. But as I sang, the growl rose into a high-pitched scream, worse than a mountain lion, worse than a banshee. I couldn't believe no one else heard it. I searched the faces looking back at me. All I saw was mild relief that somebody was singing and everything was okay. And the voice grew and grew in the church, a hateful sound with that Hitler shriek in it, and it was aimed at me, and my voice faltered, and in that moment it almost had me. My right hand crept up to grip Nathan's arm. I could feel the tendons shift when he changed chords. We started the third verse. Now the angry screams bouncing off the walls of the sanctuary were horrible, all the more so because no one else heard them. But the music was there too, and the song carried me along, and I came in the way I was supposed to, through many dangers, toils, and snares. I saw Artis's honest face watching me trustfully, and I gestured at her with the hymnal. She blinked, but her mouth started to move, and I heard her voice over the roars and shrieks of whatever menaced us in that church. One by one her friends joined in. They all knew the words. And by the fourth verse, the entire congregation was singing. The thing still yelled and screamed and threatened, but we were a match for it now. Bright shining as the sun, we sang, and all of a sudden I felt so gloriously unafraid, gripping Nate's arm. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. With the last gentle, dignified strum of Nathan's guitar, the devil voice was silent, as if it had never existed. The congregation beamed at us, sheepishly delighted at having helped sing a hip version of an old standard, and Nathan and I sat down. The guest minister got up and went to the pulpit. Something in his eyes as he looked at me and Nate made me wonder if he'd caught an echo of the evil voice after all. "Thank you, Nathan," he said. "Thank you, Tim, is it? Tim?" I didn't pay attention to his sermon. I was grateful for the solid pew beneath me, because suddenly I was shaking all over. Beside me, Nathan kept his eyes downcast and swallowed continually through the rest of the service. I knew he hadn't heard the voice. He was just upset because he couldn't sing. The thought that he was supposed to head back to Egan's after this made my blood run cold. He stared mutely at his hymnal during the closing hymn. Then, after the benediction, when people came up to say thanks for the music, I had to be the go-between again. "Laryngitis," I said over and over, and laughed sympathetically, and Nathan would smile faintly. Brother and Mrs. Whitley came over. "You okay, son?" Brother Whitley asked, still inclined toward sternness, but with concern in his eyes. Nathan shrugged, pointed to his throat, and shook his head. "Well, I hope you're not coming down with something," his mom said. How I wished he would, flu or some other normal illness that would lay him low for a couple of weeks and keep him away from Egan. As soon as his parents were occupied talking to other people, Nathan grabbed my arm and jerked his head toward the door. When we were in the parking lot, he said, "I didn't realize it's past 9. "You can talk!" "Sure I can talk," he said wearily. "My voice only closes up when I try to sing, remember? I just didn't want to talk in there." "No point in going back to River House if you can't sing." "I've got to." Nathan opened the rear gate of the station wagon to put in his guitar. I watched him without speaking. "I don't know what's going on with my voice," he said, "but that A&R guy's coming to listen tomorrow night, and I have to make the effort, you know. I have to show Egan that this is important to me. I don't want him to lose confidence in me. I still didn't speak because there was nothing I could say. His mind was made up. Then I remembered something. Is that why he was yelling at you today? Because he's losing confidence in you? The glow from the parking lot light shone full on Nathan's face. He didn't look upset, only serious. This means a lot to him. He's invested time and effort and money in me, so he's a little bit on edge. Yeah, like Hitler was on edge in 1944. He wasn't being mean, Tim. He's just nervous. Nathan, I thought, you would not believe somebody was being mean if they smashed your guitar over your head. Nervous? That my music won't get across. See, the guy liked me in his office, but in front of a crowd it's different. I think Egan's afraid it won't impress him enough. And what if it doesn't? For the first time, Nathan's gaze dropped. Well, it has to. No, it doesn't. It might not. Then what? Nathan raised his eyes to me resolutely and smiled. Tim, he said, quit worrying. It'll be fine. Nate, when you and I were up there singing tonight, didn't you hear anything weird? What do you mean? Like what? Like somebody yelling or crying. Nathan just gave me an elaborate, you're crazy look, and kept leaning against the car. Now he seemed in no hurry to leave, as if he took strength from the soft night, the warm, cottony air, the crickets chirping. Suddenly exhausted, I gave up and leaned back too, looking out over the field and down to the river. Hey, Nathan said, I'm going to talk to Paige and tell her I'm sorry about today. But if she won't listen, will you talk to her? Nate, I don't belong in the middle of that one. Please. She likes you a lot. She'll listen to you. Well, what could I say, feeling as I did that there was so little I could do for him any more? Okay, all right. For another minute we stayed suspended in the peace of that summer night. Finally he held out his hand. You've still got the keys. 100 times later I wished I'd kept the keys, said I'd drive him to Riverhouse and then driven him far in the other direction, north as far as Canada, whatever it took to get him out of Egan's reach. But I tossed him the keys and said, Don't strain that voice. I won't, he said, and gave me an encouraging grin before he got behind the wheel. I stood and watched until the car's tail lights disappeared when he turned onto the street in front of the parsonage. I had a horn for all the earth to hear. Its golden voice blew brighter every year. Then fear made it falter, and anger caused it strain. Now the horn in the rain lies rusting. I had a horn to call my own to me, but it blew fire, and she ran to be free. Its clamor sounded from out a twisted brain. Now the horn in the rain lies rusting. I had a horn, but no more can it ring. Too much discord has brought the sentencing. My horn's condemned, with sorrow so acute, forever to be mute and lie rusting. The minor key and formal English ballad structure of this song make it sound hundreds of years old. In stark contrast, Nathan's singing comes across as young and raw, stripped of the mellowness it held earlier in the summer. By now he could no longer keep his voice steady. I can hear the shaking in almost every sustained note. Still, he lays down the song with great dignity, robbing the lyrics of any trace of self-pity, trying, even at this late date, to take responsibility for what was happening to him.